Women Making Moves, where we celebrate the moves that women are making. My name is Amy Pons, founder of Unlock the Magic, Coaching, Marketing, and Healing. I'm joined today with Mary Waweru. Mary is a racial equity, social impact, decoloniality, and global diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. She's a LinkedIn content creator and garnered over 2.6 million impressions in the last year, educating the world on these topics. Mary is also a global project manager with industry experience in marketing, recruitment, and hospitality. Her experience with gender equity work began in Kenya with community organizing and includes participation in the 2015 Nairobi protests against gender and child-based violence that led to a parliamentary invitation to meet Joyce Wanjala Lay, a county women representative. Later in 2019, Mary met and advised Manoa Esipisu, Kenya's High Commissioner to the UK on service design through her advocacy for better experiences of Kenyans abroad while attaining official Kenyan documentation. Mary has designed anti-racism and diversity, equity, inclusion DEI courses, facilitated and moderated international panels, and worked with global clients including EY, Unity Technologies, Next Games, a Netflix studio, and Avon. Her social impact and mentorship projects have been done in partnership with higher education institutions like Abo University and Haaga-Helia University of Applied Sciences in Finland. Racial, cultural, and spiritual inclusion are an integral part of Mary's work, which is propelled by her love and deep connection to her African heritage. Mary is keeping society and businesses educated and challenged to consistently do better for globally marginalized communities and the environment. She continues to take a firm stand against the unethical extraction and exploitation of the African continent through neocolonial business models and activities. Mary, welcome.
Thank you so much, Amy. I'm happy to be here.
I'm a proud graduate of Crest Impact.
Yes, you are. Oh my God, yes, you are. You can never forget that. I'm happy.
Oh, that was gorgeous. That was like my favorite day spent. Just your content is exquisite, and being able to share back with you in a very safe container some of the things that I get pretty worked up about. And recently I participated in another event called Dear White Women, hosted by Erin Curran Johnson.
I know Erin.
Oh, you know Erin, of course. Okay. So I went to that. And one of the things that was interesting, and I want to ask you about, is one of my reactions when I meet bigotry, racism, misogyny, any sort of interaction that I have that someone is either joking about or blatantly exerting power and control over another human, I have the tendency to get real ragey. I might cry, I might yell, I might get like real worked up. Yeah. From that session of Dear White Women, I think I learned part of my reaction is still putting my whiteness at the center. What are your thoughts on that?
Yes.
Because in my quest to like say that's not okay, I get real worked up. So like that was a really interesting point for me.
I think white women have this thing, and it's not just white women. It's white people. They have this thing where they have to be the main characters. So it's a main character thing where whatever you're listening to, it's very hard, especially when you're living in a world where you see yourself on TV, when people are, spreading information, giving the news or anything, that you see yourself in them. When you go to schools, when you're learning something, the people educating you look like you. The president, everyone else looks like you. You become accustomed to always being the center of the conversation or the person who's the most relevant to the conversation. And this is a problem. And this is how we even have white saviorism, because even when people come to Africa or when they want to discuss Africa, it's always from the perspective of the white person. And this is why people think they need to save us and not save us from themselves, because you're the main characters. But then you need to understand who's the villain, who's doing all these things. So how can you be both the main character, the savior, and also the villain? You cannot be both of them.
No. That's, you know me a little bit by now, and that my intentions is to educate and say, hey, that's not okay. But at the same time, in my spirituality and in leading with love, some might say that activism is moot, because that activism is what's stirring someone's soul. And I'm like, that doesn't quite land.
I disagree with that because I
Yeah,
don't think we would have any kind of change in the world or in any kind of system without the activism. So then we cannot negate the activism itself.
yeah,
And I think it's all a matter of, again, once again, making sure that you understand what role you're playing in every conversation. And if you're sitting with your family members or your friends and, people who are making jokes about other people who are marginalized or racialized as Black or Asian or anything else, then you need to understand that this person, number one, this is not, this is a human being, and this is a person who's doing the same thing that very many other people are doing, millions of people actually. So this is not the only person. So when you are in a position of power or when you are coming from the same community, you need to first understand that you already know this is what everyone, not everyone, sorry, this is what most people are doing. They do not tend to respect people who are not from their community. And so when you are expending all that energy, being angry at this one person, knowing that this is a community issue, this is an issue within the white society or Western society, then you're kind of wasting it. So you kind of need to be able to not remove yourself from what you are experiencing or what you're seeing, but you need to start being realistic. You're seeing this one person saying this or doing this, but you know that there are many more doing that. So use that opportunity to discuss what your community is doing. And this is what happens. We see a leader or, anyone doing something racist, and we most times make it about just them. And we spend all this energy. And this is where other people who are doing the same things or similar things to a less degree or to a worse degree get away with it, because now you have a villain and you have a face for it. And it's expert, let's call them Smith or Michael. So Michael is the bad guy, Smith is the bad guy, and everyone else is the good person. And you're going to go in there as the good white person and tell them they are very wrong and they are horrible people. But you forget that Smith or Michael is living within the same society as you. So before they got to the point where they are speaking the way they are speaking, before they got to the point where they are being racist, they were nurtured to be like that by the society around them. So why not focus on the society that is creating these kinds of behaviors and habits and work on dismantling that? So it shouldn't be about dismantling the person or making the person seem like the villain or the poster person, but making sure that the systems and the attitudes and the beliefs around this person are dealt with and dismantled. So you're not really the main character in this,
yeah.
in this. You are something else. You're participating. You're not just, watching there and saving people. So I know it's a bit weird, hard to understand, but
I think in the past, if I didn't eviscerate them, I felt like I was giving them a pass or they got to get away with it. These days, as I do try to lead with love and education information, I'd say, oh, help me understand why you feel that way, or help me understand why that's funny. Is that less putting me as a white person at center and trying to understand the origin?
I will do it differently because, again, I do not identify as white.
Right.
So for me, it's about, one, saving my energy and making sure that it can be different for other people. I'm not telling other people what to prioritize and what not to prioritize. So for me, I'm not trying to find out why a white person finds it funny to say that, they can call African people monkeys or whatever. This is not why I'm there, because I know there's millions of others who are saying this. And I already know where it comes from. Because again, I'm also educating people against racism. So I don't need to know whether your grandmother or your teacher or someone else influenced you to think that these kinds of things are jokes or even appropriate. What I want to do is to make sure that you know that, one, we are not going to tolerate this, because you know where you found it. That's not the thing. We are not going to tolerate it. It's harmful, and you need to do better. So that way I'm saving my energy, and we're not also having the back and forth. Because I noticed something with our white allies. They have this thing where I think you believe you have a lot of time to, go back and forth, back and forth. And I myself, I'm actually going to give another example where I've seen people who look like me, who identify like me. They could be African or Black. And I've seen them defending things that are actually very indefensible because they are trying to be palatable to whiteness. And they do this a lot. It's also a survival thing for them. And one rule that I have is that I do not argue with such people. I do not argue with them. I will block you. I will say one thing and be done. but I will not spend my time telling a person who looks like me that what they are doing is harmful to people like us, because they know that. But they've made the decision that that is not as important as having a place in the circles of whiteness to benefit in some sort of way. It could be economically or any other way. They know why they're doing that. So I'm not going to ask you as a fellow Black person, why do you think this is like this? But then again, it depends on who I'm speaking to, what they are exposed to. So the kind of conversations I'm going to have with my fellow Africans, let's say who've never lived in spaces where there are white people all around them, it's going to be a very different conversation, even though it will have something to do with colonialism or neocolonialism. But it's very different if I'm speaking to a person who was born or at least raised or is living in the West, and they are already aware of the beliefs and the systems much more, there's closer proximity than a person who's living in Africa that isn't physically in the West. So I'm going to have very different conversations with these people. And I might try to investigate more with a person who's from my community in Africa that has never left that community physically. The conversation is going to be very different. And I'm also going to be more patient. But if you're here, we are living in the same kind of world and you know all these things. So I don't have time to find out why you think that. And I notice this is what white women do. Now, I'm not here to critique how white women do it when you go into spaces to help one another. That's something you have to find on your own. You have to find a method and a system to get to the point where people are having an actual conversation with you. It's realistic, and you're not focusing on creating a villain within the story or within the space, but actually finding out what structures and what spots and what points are creating this in all of you to different extents. Am I making sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the main theme I'm getting from you is that when I'm, as a white woman, in those moments, not centering it about my reaction or my trigger, more about understanding the larger impact of the group, not necessarily about that individual or me, but just assessing in real time. I understand what I stand for, and I get to choose, like every other person, place, or thing around me, and every single day, I get to choose how much energy I extend. I'll give you an example that I just had talking about the election in the US. And a person voted not the way I voted. And I wanted to understand that more. I wanted to lean in because for the whole month of November, I couldn't talk to anyone. So the number one priority for me going into this election was civil rights, humanity, all humans being able to exist as them freely themselves. That was my first priority. That was not this other person's priority. And when I talked about how the repercussions are going to impact marginalized or underserved communities, their response was, well, everyone gets to choose where they live. And I was so not meaning to jab when I said this. I said, as a privileged white woman, you get to say that. And it's not true, by the way.
Yeah, it's not true.
And they got pretty mad. That's theirs, not mine. I said a fact. I don't feel that I put myself as center. I actually do know information on that, so I shared it back. And to your point, it's like, I don't want you or any other Black woman to ever feel like, hey, did I do this right? I think with anything that you and other women have taught me, don't make it about you. Make it about the facts, what is true, and help educate as far as they can hear you.
Yeah. I think one other thing is that we have to remember, apart from making sure that we're expending our energy in the best way possible, we also have to remember that sometimes and many times people are not ready for these conversations. And this is why they become something else. They become an argument. They become a fight. Sometimes they get violent, right? Not for me, they haven't, but there are people who get into conversations about racism, for example, and marginalization, and it turns into violence. So that's another thing you have to remember. So there's your energy. How do you use it best? Do I go into history rather than giving this person the opportunity to think that they control the narrative or that they have the power to change reality in a way that is performative? So the things you ask the person are very important. So I will mostly focus on speaking about the facts. So this is what we know, this is what we know, and this is probably why you are saying what you are saying, and this is why you don't care about certain things or certain people. So you already have your facts. One thing I always tell allies, be ready, stay ready. So when you know your facts, when you know the history, When you know patterns, then it's easier to actually have a conversation. Another thing is that, again, some people are not ready for this conversation. So you're going to be wasting your time. You're going to be doing something that you don't really need to be doing. So sometimes actually you do need to walk away. And again, this is very dependent on what is happening in that moment, what the exact topic is, what the exact subtopic is. So it depends on very many things. But the most important thing is to also understand when you're in such conversations is that you are not there to save, for example, people who are racialized as Black or Asian or whatever. No, you are not saving anyone. I've heard a lot of people, for example, Kenya was colonized by the British, and I've heard a lot of people from the UK, from British people say that, well, we ended colonialism or we ended slavery. They claim to have ended very many things and they want some sort of accolade or they want to be recognized as people who stopped something. And this is the saviorism thing that it's innately in people who are on the side, or rather who are benefiting from colonialism. They tend to want to be seen as the saviors. You cannot be the savior in a story that we did not ask for. I did not ask to be colonized. My ancestors did not ask for people to invade the continent and divide it into countries and create all these borders. So no one can come and tell me that they ended it because we did not invite it. So when you're in these conversations, you are not a savior, you are participating. And this is something that white people need to understand. You are participating in it. You're participating in it from an economic standpoint. You're participating from an educational level. The way you do education, the systems of education, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is avoided, what is prevented, what is minimized, and what is erased. So you're participating in very many ways. And for example, in education, you may not be the teacher, but you are learning something. And the way you learn it and what you learn, you are spreading it. You've already spread it. So this is why you cannot see yourself as a savior, but rather a person who's participating in the oppression of other people. And sometimes it doesn't have to be voluntary. For example, with economic systems, we cannot say that everyone came to the table and decided, you know what, Africa is going to be the source of raw materials. Africa is going to be the place where we pick people or steal people and, do all manner of horrible things to them, enslave them, colonize them. Not every single person who's living now, no one living now made those decisions. No one. So we have to be very clear. But that does not mean that they are not upholding the systems. And this is where the responsibility and accountability should be seen because they are upholding it. Who is upholding the system of neocolonialism? It's the people who are living now, not the people who are gone and buried. So always remember you're participating and you are not a savior and you're not that much better than a person who voiced something that you would not necessarily do because, again, you're participating in another way, like I just mentioned, economically, through education, through media, through how you consume information. Whose books are you reading? Whom do you quote? Whom do you see as a leader? Whom do you see as a consultant? All these things, you are participating.
That's beautiful. How are you participating? I find a lot of people don't even understand that they are participating actively current day. So awareness and then understanding of how you're participating, and maybe you could think about moving differently in some way for yourself. So
Exactly.
Amazingly said as always, Mary. What are you excited about? What's coming up, whether in Crest Impact or otherwise?
Well, this is something I've always been excited about. I started Crest Impact last year, and I always had Africa at the center of everything I was doing because I am African. I am Kenyan before anything else. Yes, I am a citizen of Finland because this is where I've lived for the last about 20 years, but I've always had Africa at the center of everything that I do. And this is the one thing that makes me very excited. Number one, I plan to do actual projects that center Africa because it's been 2 years. So I've still been kind of, warming things up and trying to discover things as a new entrepreneur and all these things. But I do plan to do some work with Africa. So meaning actually partner with Africans in Africa and also Africans in the diaspora, because there's many of us, just African ancestry people. And I've already started one in October. I don't know if you're aware of this, but I have Moments with Africa. That's the latest thing that I've done. It's a series. I have it once every month where I bring people from the African diaspora from different industries and we have a topic and we just discuss it. And once a month, we're going to continue doing this. In December, we're taking a break because people are with family, people are traveling, people are resting, myself included. I wanted to intentionally really rest this month. But in January 2025, we're going to come back again with another episode. So if you want to catch the recordings, you can do that on my YouTube page, Quest Impact's YouTube page, and see the topics we're discussing there. Now, it's very important for me to say why this excites me, Projects with Africa, including Moments with Africa, the series. I'm doing this because I want people to see us. I want people to hear us. I want people to understand us. And I want people to remember us. Hence the consistency, why I want to do it every month. I want people to be able to see our diversity because many times people talk about a Black person or an African person, and there's usually just one of us. This is not right. This is not fair. It doesn't show our diversity. And many times we are tokenized. And, we, even within the systems where only one of us is invited, we tend to be under so much pressure to just conform and assimilate and be something we are not. But I want to show people what it looks like to actually intentionally have several Africans having a conversation together, determining their own narratives, talking about their own histories, and deciding what works for us, for our continent, for our lives outside the continent, for our professions, our careers, our education systems, everything. This is what I want people to see. And when you see this, you remember that, yes, you have to humanize us. We're not begging for it. We're just telling you this is what we need, and you just have to give it to us. So it's very exciting for me to continue with this. So stay tuned.
I can't wait to listen and tune in. Amazing. I want to go to a post that you actually made, and I love it. It's beautiful. And I'll read just a little bit of it. As a Kenyan and an African woman whose country and continent are sources of cheap raw materials and slave labor, is it reasonable for me to support every woman, especially white and Western women, fighting for opportunities and representation as our oppressors? Africa's women and children have been sacrificed to benefit all others, yet we are expected to nicely support other women who are fighting for representation in these same unjust colonial systems. Why is this not a concern? Who are the women approaching Indigenous African women as equals with respect and the full understanding that all our children need to eat and exist in safety? Where do we fit in your colonial and white supremacist hierarchies? When women who are not Indigenous to the continent of Africa enter our spaces, do we see a pattern where they experience life like us, or do they benefit from colonial structures that subjugate us and favor them? They're men and children in most ways, especially economically. Ooh, Mary, such a beautiful post.
Many times I think I mentioned assimilation when we are in spaces, the only Black person or the only African ancestry person. We are forced to speak like everyone else. We are forced to prioritize things that matter to all these other people. It's not usually about us. So even with the post, as you just read, you can see I intentionally center the African experience. This is something that I cannot separate. And I'm expected not to think like this. I'm expected to not think as a Westerner because I exist in the West. I live in Finland. I'm a Finnish citizen. But I cannot do that because then if I do that, I am participating in the unjust system that oppresses and subjugates my people. My father lives in Kenya. I have sisters in Kenya. I have nephews in Kenya. My mother is buried in Kenya. My sister is buried in Kenya. So how can I forget who I am and where I will return 100% and act like I'm only a Westerner? I am a Westernized, but I am not a Westerner. I'm an African existing here as an African. And it's not something that I can hide. People can see I'm African. You can hear from my accent. I'm from a place that is not Western. You can hear that I'm probably from a place in Africa, and I am. I have embraced my identity, and I've embraced everything about myself. It's still a struggle because of anti-Blackness. It's in colonialism. This is what we're taught. We're taught to hate ourselves, reduce ourselves. But I act intentionally against this. And this is why I did that post, because I'm not just going to see myself as a woman. What kind of woman? I'm a woman from Kenya. I'm from Africa. And I have to think about my sisters, my aunties, our mothers, and our children. And this is why I say that I ask why, or is it reasonable for me to be expected to support every single woman when I am an African woman and from the place that is exploited to benefit everyone else, including women and their children. These are reasonable. It's not. Because there's capitalism, especially in the Nordics, there's this exceptionalism and there's this praise about this place, with female empowerment, the women are leading, especially in places like Iceland, they're known to be, movers and shakers. And I live here, but I'm not part of that. But why am I not part of that? Because of my identity. I am not accepted in these circles as one of them. So why would I pretend that feminism is about me? It's not about me. Feminism in the Nordics, white feminism is not about African women. It's not about Kenyan women. It's about white women and their need to have part of or split the power between themselves and white men. And what power do white men have? They have the power to subjugate everyone else. So we need to be honest. What kind of representation do white women want? What equality do they want, or what kind of equity do they want? And who is being oppressed in the piece of cake that they want? We have to speak about it.
Yeah. Pooh, this is where I get interesting feedback myself from white women in the US. Like, they genuinely can't understand where I'm coming from when I say, like, let's celebrate womanism, all women, because feminism historically has only included white women. So I feel very deeply rooted in finding out the incredible indigenous cultures of every single woman is incredibly important and fascinating to me. I want to not only learn that, but amplify and support that any way that I can. I try to move differently on any degree that I can. And I met with confusing backlash.
This is what colonialism does. When you go to any African country or wherever you go, whether you go to Australia or Canada or wherever, and you find the indigenous people, you will find something in common, that all of us have been forced to live in a system that we did not create. And every single one of us is living in a Western system that we did not create. It's a Western system. It's not indigenous to these places that you're going to. And this is why even, when you're traveling, when you're going to Africa, you go to restaurants where they're eating, you're going to find the same fast food joints in Kenya or in South Africa or Nigeria. You're going to find the same KFC. There's McDonald's, depending on where you're going. There's all these places. And I think people just need to be very intentional with and learning many of these things, because if you're taking the time to go to a different country, why would you want to go to a place where they're eating the exact same food as you? And by the way, remember, in these places, even the hotels that people go to, you have to ask yourself, who owns them? It's usually your own fellow Americans or fellow Europeans. It's not going to be the indigenous people from that part of the world. So in such cases, you can do something about it. And forgive me for being focused on Africa, because Africa is me and Africa is my focus. So I'm just giving examples of what to do when you're there. First of all, where are you staying? Who owns this property? How are they treating the people there? And how does this business support the indigenous people of that community? That's when you know, okay, am I actively participating in colonialism, knowing I can do better? Or am I using the system that is there, but playing against it to make sure that the indigenous people are at least going to be, they're going to be better than I found them. So wherever you're going to buy your souvenirs, wherever you're staying, where you're eating, what you're eating, and how you speak about the people there. This is very important. And how to avoid situations that are going to make you add more injury to the injuries that we already have because of colonialism. So you have to be very aware. And this is what determines what kind of participant you are. Are you actively participating without a care, or are you trying to remove yourself from actively ruining or harming the people who are already marginalized by your systems of colonialism? So there is something you can do. I understand that everyone has bills to pay. You have mortgage to pay. You have to go to school, obtain some sort of education. But guess what? You're a parent. Okay, you have to take your child to this school. There are options. What are they being taught in that school? Can you find a teacher? Can you find some other place where they can learn African American history? Because it is world history. It's relevant history. You can do that. So it's not as easy as saying, well, I'm participating or I need this. No, there are so many things you can do to both educate yourself, educate your children, and unlearn. You can also support businesses owned by Black people. owned by Asian ancestry people. You can support their businesses. You do not always have to go give your money to the same people who are creating more neo-colonial systems to subjugate other people.
Exactly, exactly. I think some people look at me sometimes, are like, where did you get this from? This being the desire to educate or inform or to do things differently. Well, where it came from, because people will be like, listen, the quote unquote indigenous of America is capitalism and colonialism. I'm like, starting in 1776, but that was not indigenous. And even in 1776, that did not include all women. So I personally, while I grew up and was educated only in the systems of oppression, I now am aware. And for those who also want to be aware, we get into community and say, here's how we can ensure it's the inclusion piece. Like, let's bring everybody in together, because the reality is that we're not just white men and women in this country. So that's where it comes from for me, is that I have a desire to make sure I'm supporting everyone outside the system so that eventually the system of oppression is dismantled. And the way that I do that personally is I support those that don't look like me.
Exactly. And this is what we want with, you mentioned my post. This is what I'm trying to say, because many times I think white women think that because they're already operating from a place of being marginalized by white men. And they think that you mentioned about, white men in America, in the US, being able to vote at some point, but women weren't allowed to vote. And then when women were allowed to vote, it was only some women, not all of them. So I think the one mistake that white women make is thinking that we are going to do things the same way they have been done, or we are going to get to a point of equity or a point of justice as different genders and races using the same formula they did. No, I'm not going to have to wait decades or a century to be able to do this and this, because you as a white woman had to wait decades or centuries to do this and this, or to own land, or to depending on where you're from. Because remember, the same thing it's not exactly the same thing, but in Africa, the same thing. Some women could not be able to own land at some point. Now they can. So it's not always been easy for us. But we're not going to follow or wait as long as a white woman did to get from point A to B just because they did. No, we are going into 2025 and we have to be intersectional. And if you as a white woman feel so much, if you understand the pain and the frustration of having to be left behind and waiting decades and centuries, why would you want another woman to go through the same thing?
Right. Imagine how much we feel already as a privileged white woman. And imagine having to wait another 40 plus years. No, just no. And so for y'all who ask me as a white woman, where does this come from? I do not want any woman to ever feel like, when I'm saying women, I mean all women. We're not doing a phased approach. We're not doing MVPs. We're not doing installs. No, all women.
Exactly.
All women. I just encourage everyone by any degree to be aware of the incredible diversity that does illustrate today's United States and the world, and reflect that.
And I think we need to remember that, sometimes people say you need to come from a place of empathy, or you need to come from a place of love. People have all these different places where they're coming from. But I think the best way to explain this is to remind everyone, especially white women who are, they're closest to us than white men. They're closer to white men than we are, but they're closer to us than white men are, because we share gender as women. They need to understand that you should be doing things from a point of justice and a point of humanity.
Yeah.
Because when you do something from a point of feminism, the focus is only gender. And when you focus on gender alone, you're not centering my experience as an African or as a Black woman. So that is never going to serve me. Your feminism is never going to serve me. It's going to serve you alone. So come from a point of justice, come from a point of humanity, and do things the right way. There's right, there's wrong. And that's it.
Humanity. That's it. Mary, as we start to wind down, as your passion and work continues for, of course, Africa, and also the women of the world, for those who are blissfully ignorant because they've never had to understand, and for those who like me are like, wait a second, what about all the women? What would you share with both?
I think when we all understand that everything that we are doing, everything we are saying, the systems that we exist in, when we understand that everything is interconnected, the interconnectedness is there. And we need to start understanding what that interconnectedness is. Because that's the way I, as an African woman, will be able to see a woman from a totally different part of the world who is also oppressed, is experiencing their lives and why they're experiencing their lives like that. And this is where we will find a common point where we can say, you know what, this is what I'm experiencing, this is what you're experiencing, but this is how we can rise up together, and make sure that you're okay and I'm okay, not just one of us. So when we find the interconnectedness, when we find what makes us human, because there are things that we share, there are things, including those systems, when we see what connects us, then we will be able to start working. But the more, and this is something that's very specific to Americans, I'm sorry to say this, but many times Americans tend to exist in this world where they're the only ones. Again, that main character thing is also an American thing. It's not just a white women thing. No, it's also an American thing where even when it comes to justice and humanity, this is why it's taken so long for all this movement we've seen over the last year to happen, because people have been so disconnected from the entire world. And I'm here thinking, why would you be so disconnected? You're a first world country. You have all this development, all these things. But Americans need to start understanding that everything that is happening in your environment and in your systems affects so many other people around the world, billions of people around the world. And once you start understanding this interconnectedness, you're going to be more intentional with how you're participating. Because again, remember, we're all participating. It's not about finding one person and villainizing them and say they're the bad guy. No. So when you start understanding how the world works and how it is attached or tied to your own country and its systems, then you start working. That's it.
Mary, where can we find you?
You can find me, mostly I'm on LinkedIn. So Mary Waweru. You can find me also on my company's page, Crest Impact, also on LinkedIn. I'm also on YouTube. This is where we've started uploading our recordings starting October with a monthly event called Moments with Africa. So go there, get a rerun or a recording rather of our events. And yeah, find me there or find me on the website, www.crestimpact.com. I'm there. All my courses and workshops are there. And I also speak to people one-on-one. So you don't have to come as a group. You can come by yourself. You can book a consultation. And the good thing with a consultation compared to a course or workshop is that you decide what we're going to talk about. So you can already send me questions before and then book your consultation. Let's talk for an hour or so. And yeah, I'm always available. So come to me. I'm not as scary as it seems. Anti-racism is all about humanity, what connects us, and, just understanding the systems. It's not something that you should be scared about. What you should be scared about is what is going to continue to happen if you don't do something about it. So find me everywhere.
Any closing remarks?
First of all, I'm really grateful that first we had the session where we were just talking about these topics with the consultation, the course, and just learning about these things, because this is how things should be. We need to first understand each other as people, where we are coming from and our experiences. So I really enjoyed that. And I enjoyed that it moved on to be this. Because I don't do a lot of interviews, I don't do a lot of podcasts, obviously, but this I had to do. And I'm really grateful. The energy was good. And thank you for being human. You see, being human is what we need. You don't have to be a feminist and focus on only gender and how you're affected as a white person. What you need to focus on is being human, humane, and humanizing other people. And thank you so much for doing that.
Thank you, Mary.
Thank you.